So in life, we make a lot of choices every day. You wake up, the first thing you do is start deciding things. What am I going to wear? What am I going to eat? Where am I going to go? Essentially, every day in and out, we're voting on something. You may vote, hey, should I go to this sports thing or should I go to youth group? Obviously, we know the answer, right? Youth group, duh. Wrong answer. It's the first Saturday of the month. It's early. Should I sleep in or should I go to see you at the cafe? It's 9 a.m. It's a Saturday morning. I'm not hearing the answer. What's the answer? See you at the cafe, obviously. Do you go to Chick-fil-A or Cane's, Allie? Wrong answer. Chick-fil-A, obviously. Do you like dogs or cats? Dogs. Dogs. Dogs, obviously. On a Friday night, do you want to hang out with your friends? Do you want to stay in by yourself and watch Netflix? Depending on my week, it could be one or the other. I have weeks where I need to go out and I have weeks where I need to stay in and watch Netflix. Do you want to wake up and be lame one day, or do you want to wake up and go to Poplar Bluff with us this weekend? Poplar Bluff! Okay. Some of you might be voted homecoming king or queen. What did you say last week? You placed second homecoming court. That's something you get voted for. Some of you may be class presidents. Does anyone do like class presidents or anything?
Not really.
No. Henry? Camp president, yes. And that's kind of a vote. Kind of. It's more of a crowd yelling decision. You might be a team captain of your sports team. Are you team captain of your basketball team? Are you actually? That's awesome. Hey, one of you may even be president someday. I would like to see Jordan. I think Jordan. What is it? President Palmer. What do we think? What are we looking at? 2030 something? 2040 something? Say 2030 something. Okay. But out of everything you're ever going to vote for in life, there's an election in our lives that is more important than anything you'll ever be a part of. And so for the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about vote for Jesus. Yay. Because it's election season. I thought this would be cool to do. So in this series, we're going to talk about the most important election in our lives, the candidates, what the candidates support, and what a vote for Jesus means. Essentially, tonight we're going to intro by talking about what does authority look like in our life, because we vote authorities into our lives or they just somehow happen, but we have authorities in our life. So we're going to talk about that and the candidates tonight. So based on that, I'm going to welcome you to come grab your handouts and get started. Okay. So during election season, at least in America, because I've never been a part of any other election season in any other country, but there's election seasons all over the world, and typically they come with a lot of tension within the country. People argue, they fight, they are prideful, a bunch of know-it-alls. Everyone out of nowhere becomes political geniuses every 4 years. It's ridiculous. This series is not for me to sway your vote one way or another because, well, you guys can't even vote, for one thing. The point of this series is to talk about the spiritual election that it is at the forefront of our minds, or at least it should be, amongst this time of conflict and tension in the country. It makes us, this time of tension and conflict makes us believe that this is the most important thing of our lives, like nothing else matters, but that is not the case. First off, it's important to note that God is never caught off guard. What does that mean? It means God doesn't see someone get elected into any kind of authority position or office or anything and goes, oh my goodness, I did not see that coming. I did not know that was going to happen. Why is that not the case?
He's out of time.
He's out of time. He's God. He knows everything. He's beginning. He's end. He knows what's going to happen. He knows everything. What might be surprising is that someone we might see as evil or might do evil things that we perceive as them doing evil, they may win an election somewhere in the world, whatever country, wherever you is. My childhood speaking is coming out. Okay. To be put in a position of authority. Okay, there's a lot of authority in our lives. You could consider me an authority in your life with grace and peace and love, right? Do you think that catches God off guard when someone we would perceive as evil or perceived as doing evil things is elected into a position of authority? Do you think God is caught off guard by that? No. Why would God allow someone to take that position of authority? We're going to read these two verses and we're going to talk about it. So I need someone to read John 19:11, and I need someone to read Romans 13:1.
Jesus answered me, "You will have no authority over me at all, unless it have been given from above."
There is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God.
So in this John 19 passage, Jesus has been arrested. He's put before the people. They're saying, let's crucify him. And Pilate is saying, I don't think he's guilty. And so the people are trying to say, no, crucify him. Pilate's like, I don't find him guilty. Like, if you want to do that, you do that. But there's a point where Pilate brings Jesus back into his headquarters and he starts asking him questions, and Jesus doesn't answer him. And Pilate goes, do you understand that I have the authority to release you or crucify you? And that's Jesus' response in John 19. Like, you wouldn't have anything over me if it wasn't given to you from above. When you get to Romans 13:1, in Romans 13, Paul talks about how everyone needs to submit to governing authorities, and that those who resist authority are opposing God's command. It's really interesting, and it's not something you really think about, but it's a good topic. We're going to talk about it. So authorities were put in place to govern God's law. And essentially, they enact punishment for those laws that God has of his own commandment list. So think about God's law and think about American law. Do you see some overlap there? What are some laws that you see that overlap? That God says this and America also says this. Think of the 10 Commandments. Don't kill.
No, it's do not murder.
Do not murder. Yeah, do not murder. Same thing, but that's okay. Is there any others? Evie? What about don't steal? Does God say, yeah. Does God say don't steal? Is it legal to steal here in America?
Yes.
What about lying? Is lying one of the 10 Commandments? Are we allowed to lie here? Under what circumstances can you not lie? Can't lie to a judge? You can't lie in a court of law. That is punishable by imprisonment. You can't lie. If they don't find out, you could, but like you shouldn't because you're putting yourself at risk. Okay, so yes. Yeah, you put your hand on the Bible and you swear in, which kind of goes against the Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. We just talked about this at Max's house on Saturday. All that to say, later in Romans 13, Paul talks about paying your obligations to everyone. So he says, pay your taxes to those you owe taxes to. Pay your tolls to those you owe tolls to. Pay your respect to those who you owe respect, and pay your honor to those who you owe honor. Don't owe anything to anyone except to love one another. And essentially what he's saying is, if I owe you something, I need to pay that debt and and that's kind of an act of love, essentially. Because he goes on to say that those who love one another have fulfilled the law, because love fulfills the law, and that is a repeated theme in the New Testament. If you just love one another, at the end of the day, you're probably fulfilling the law. That's good. Your first thing of seeing other people and interacting with other people, just love one another as first and foremost. That's part of the greatest 2 commandments, right? Right? Yes. Okay. What are the 2 greatest commandments? There you go. You got it. You got it. So this is why, for example, Paul says, and this is essentially a hard passage to study if you don't know the context. So later in the New Testament, Paul says, slaves, obey your masters. Okay, and I've used this example quite a few times, and I'm not going to be surprised if no one gets it because some things just don't seem to retain in your brains. But that's okay. Do you think Paul is agreeing with slavery here? No, that's not what he's saying. So what might Paul be saying in saying, slaves, obey your masters? Submit to those in authority. That falls in line, right? That's an act of love. So he also says, masters, respect your slaves. This is not a matter of like a power-hungry master and a lowly slave. This is essentially saying, no matter what in the relationship between a master and a slave, if a slave is treating their masters with respect and obeying them, they're not acting in retaliation or hatred or violence, but instead they would be acting in love. And love fulfills the law of Christ, correct? As we just talked about. Regardless, no matter who God puts in a position of authority, God's will is always accomplished.
For truly in this city they were gathered together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you, God, anointed. Both Herod and Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the people of Israel, to do whatever your hand and your plan had predestined to take place.
Whether we believe a person in a position of authority is evil or not, as we talked about, God has allowed for them to be there. I believe this is for one of two reasons. One, they may actually do something good. You may not see it. Maybe you're clouded by judgment, but they may do something good. In fact, they may do something good that doesn't happen, it's not recognized for like another few decades or even centuries. You guys remember Refuge last year? Another example I use all the time. David Skidmore's example where he showed just a second clip of a movie, and he had people come up and guess what the movie was about. So he had maybe 5 kids come guess what the movie was about. You cannot guess what a movie is about in a second. Okay, so then he has other kids come up and take their vote of who do you think has the best guess? Who do you think knows what the movie is about? And David said, you can pick from anyone up here. He said, pick from anyone up here. Who do you think knows the movie the best? And after like 15 kids that didn't get it, which was funny, one girl goes up and she goes to David. And she's like, well, you've seen the movie. You know what it's about. And I just loved this example. Something that we don't, essentially the idea was that we don't see our whole life. We see our life second by second, but God sees our beginning and he sees our end. We only see second by second. I can't see what's going to happen in 5 seconds, but God has already been there and he sees what's going to happen. So this idea is that someone who we may perceive as evil or may do evil things, they could do something good. Maybe God has them there for a reason. Okay, I'm not God. I don't make that decision. The other reason I could see is, and this is funny to me, that scripture says that God hands us over to our desires. And essentially what I mean by this is, imagine there's a pretty evil country somewhere, and let's say, sure, 70% of the people believe in this, this, and this, and it's like, okay, this clearly goes against God's word, and they're holding an election, and they vote in someone who also believes what they believe, and at this point, God's like, well, you want this, this, and this. That's what you want? You have free will. I'm going to hand you over to your desires, and you're going to see why you need me. You're going to see that without the goodness and the love of Christ, that nothing's going to stand. So I think in one of those two reasons, I think sometimes it's like maybe God's just handing us over to our desires at this point. We want to be an evil people, then he's just going to leave it up to evil to control us. Control us is a strong term, but you get what do you guys get what I'm saying? Hand us over to our desires. So if we're to submit to authority, what happens when authority wants you to do something that is not the will of God? If we're supposed to submit to authorities and your authority says, I want you to go kill that person, I want you to go steal from that person, I want you to, I don't know, anything, what are you supposed to do? God is the higher authority. You're absolutely right. We submit to authority, but we have obedience to God. Okay, so our obedience to God comes before our submission to man, our submission to authority. Right before this, in Acts 4:20, Peter and John are standing before the Sanhedrin saying, we cannot stop speaking about what we have seen and heard about the resurrection of Christ. They want them to stop preaching the gospel, and they keep doing it. And then you think about Paul, who was arrested and beaten so many times, and you think of all Jesus' disciples who were persecuted. They were going against authority, right? But they still did the will of God. They died because of it. So I think as long as we're good on preaching the gospel, feeding the poor, being able to go to church, we can submit to authorities as long as it's not getting in the way of submitting to God first, being obedient to God. That comes first and foremost. This leads us to the most important election of our lives. God is holding an election we all must vote in.
Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him.
This is going to give you a hint as to who the candidates are in God's election. Who do you think the first candidate is? Vote for Jesus. Based on 1 John 2, who do you think the other candidate is? The world, yes. So in God's election, it's Jesus against the world. And yes, Satan is of the world, so you're not wrong, Jaden. But essentially, it's the idea of the world against Jesus. And it's an election we all must vote in, and everyone ends up voting in anyway, whether you decide to or not. There is no third option. You either choose Jesus or you choose the world. And 1 John tells us that if you love the world or anything in it, then you don't have the love of the Father in you. There is no, I kind of agree and disagree with both sides kind of thing. There is no lukewarm Christian option. You're either all in or you're all out. So here's your final thought. God's election has eternal implications. And this thought is going to become more apparent as we move into next week and as we compare the candidates. That's what we're going to do next week. Based on what you know about Jesus already, and a lot of you know a lot about Jesus, this should be an easy vote. We should be able to get through the series and you not even have to question it. You vote for Jesus. But maybe that's not an easy decision for all of us. This is one election that I will work to sway your vote in. Not the elections of the world. I'm not going to sway your vote. I'm going to sway your vote in this election, the one that matters the most. For those of you who know Jesus and what he brings and what he provides, I hope that you'll do the same. Sway people's votes, essentially. You know, people in your schools, people in sports and band, I say it all the time, sports, band, school. Maybe even people at home that live with you that don't know Jesus or haven't voted for Jesus. Why don't you go show them the type of love that fulfills the law of Christ and show them what it means to vote for Jesus?